I'm really excited. This is the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. Except for in this talk, there are no slides. But the cool part is the code that we're going to build today is already online at github.com/robrich. Level up DevOps, GitHub Actions, and Kubernetes. Here it is. Yeah. If you want to grab an easier URL to get there, let's head over to robrich.org, robrich.org. We'll click on Presentations here at the top. And here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. And the link to the GitHub repository is right there. While we're here on robrich.org, let's take a look at the About Me page. And we'll see some of the things that I've done recently. Both Microsoft and Docker have given me some awards, Redgate as well, and Cypress. AZ GiveCamp is really fun. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software to charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp here in Oslo or wherever you traveled from, find me here at the event or hit me up on any of the socials, and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I've written a few books, well, some chapters in books. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So let's dig into Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. I understand that in about 20 minutes, we're going to get a national test of the broadcast system, and all our phones are going to beep at maximum volume. This will be really entertaining. Hopefully the build is going by then. So we'll see. If you want to turn off your phones, from what I understand, even muting them won't actually stop the beeping. So yeah, my phone too. This will be entertaining. Here's a repository. It's pretty much empty. I did come in here and create some secrets here. So I come into secrets, and I created some secrets here just to be able to use over the course of our build. But otherwise, it's a pretty empty repository. Let's build up a website. We'll put it inside of a container. We'll deploy it through a DevOps pipeline and start it in Kubernetes. So here's that folder. I've got nothing in Kubernetes. I've got nothing in this directory. And let's start by scaffolding out a website. Now, we could scaffold out a website in anything, but .NET's kind of fun. So let's say .NET new. I'm going to do an MVC site. I'll say name is Level Up DevOps. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. It knows where I'm going here. Output into the current folder. Now, both name and output are optional parameters. If I didn't put in those parameters, it would use my folder name and create a new folder inside of it. So I would have a demo folder and a second demo folder inside the demo folder with my site there. But I just scaffolded it right here. So we've got that there. Let's open it up in VS Code, and we'll take a look at it. Excellent. So we've got this full site. We've got controllers. Here's our home controller. We've got views. Here's our home view. And it says, welcome. Let's say welcome to NDC Oslo. Excellent. So now that we've got our website built, let's see if we can put it inside of a Git repository. So I'm going to create a .gitignore file, .gitignore. And let's start talking about the things that we need in our gitignore file. This is everything that we don't want to commit to our repository because it'll change frequently, or we could download it again. It will just create cruft in our repository. There's 5 groups of things here. Downloaded content, built content, temp files, user files, and secrets. Cool. Those are the 5 things that I don't want to commit to my repository. So let's take a look at each group and make sure that we've ignored the things that we need to. Downloaded content. Well, if I'm in a .NET Framework project, I would have the packages folder. If I'm in a Node project, I have the Node modules folder. In .NET Core, well, we have neither of those, so I'll just leave that section blank. Cool. Next up, built content. Well, I have the bin and obj folders here, Those are both built content. I don't want to commit those to source control. Temp files. Well, actually, let me move temp files down here. Let's talk about user-specific files. I have the .vs folder, star.suo, star.user. These are all files generated specifically for my environment that starts talking about my use of Visual Studio or VS Code, and I don't want to commit those. If I'm using another IDE, I might want to ignore, for example, the .idea folder. Maybe I want to ignore the .vs code folder. Depends on what conventions we use there. Now, all these are user-specific files, so I don't want to inflict my preferences on you or your preferences on me. If I move things around or happen to change different settings in my IDE, that isn't necessarily a thing that you may want to accept. Next up, temp files. So star.log, star.tmp, star.back. Yeah, definitely don't want to commit those SQL database backups. Star.orig, that's where we have merge files from Git. Any of these sorts of temp files, if you get to a commit window and there's files that look like they're really odd, you might want to add to this list. And then next up, secrets. Now, I might have a .env file, so I'll add that here. But let's actually look at where we would put secrets. So I have this appsettings.json file, and I'll probably put my connection strings in here. So let's put in connection strings, and we'll do my DB. And let's create the server, and we would put in our secret there. But let's not put secrets there. Let's instead use environment variables in production. Use envar. And that's my queue so that when I start up the website and it fails and it says, I can't connect to use envar, it's like, oh, let me go check in the environment variables. OK, so that's the one that I'll use in production. In development, I'll probably want to put my local connection string right here. So I'll start doing the server game again. And again, that's a secret. Let's not do that. Let's say use user secrets. And I love that user secrets is built into ASP.NET Core so that we can just grab the things. Now I have an extension here. I have the .NET user secrets extension, which allows me to come in here to my CS proj, and I'll say manage user secrets. Now, the first time it's going to say, hey, you don't have a setting in your CS proj file, so it just added it for me right here. Now, it just needs to be a unique string. By default, it creates a GUID, and that's interesting, but not super discoverable. So I'm going to change that to level up DevOps. And now if I manage user secrets again, you can see that, well, last time I did this demo, I set the connection string. This file, you can see, is in my local app data roaming folder. It's in my user profile, so it'll definitely not end up in source control. So excellent. We were able to move our settings outside of appsettings.development.json, appsettings.json. And so here in our git ignore, we probably don't need to ignore those app settings things. It doesn't have secrets in it. Now, we do want to double check and make sure as we're committing things that we don't accidentally commit our secrets there, but I think we're good. Cool, so we've got our git ignore file. Let's close others. Next up, we want to get this into a container. Let's build up the Dockerfile and .dockerignore that we'll need to be able to get this in place. So I'm going to start with the .dockerignore. And this Dockerignore file has nearly the same syntax as a gitignore file. So I'm actually just going to grab that gitignore file and set it into place. Now, I say nearly the same because in a .dockerignore, it assumes that it's relative to the beginning of the repository, where in a gitignore, it's in any directory. So if I have nested folders, I might want to say, well, in any folder, the bin and obj folders. Now I'm just going to do that for those two, but we might want to run around to all of them. Maybe that one needs to go in folders. Maybe these ones need to go in folders. And so we can walk through all of these places, ensuring that we've got the settings set just so. Now we've got those 5 places: downloaded files, built files, temp files, user-specific files, and secrets. Inside of a Docker ignore file, there's a 6th setting, and it is non-production files. So let's add that. Non-production files. Now in this section, we'll do app settings.development.json. GitHub Copilot knows where I'm going there. And we'll also add here this launch settings.json. This is all of the settings that we would use locally to start it up inside IIS or from the command line, and we definitely don't want that inside of our container. So that one is in a folder. We'll say launch settings.json, and now we're ignoring that file too. These are all the things that we don't want to copy into our production container. Now the cool part here is that will ensure that we have a clean, unique environment to be able to build this. One of the principles of DevOps is that we always build in this neutral environment, and a Docker container will be exactly that. We've excluded everything that might be user-specific or temporary or not production so that we can have this clean environment every time.
You have a spelling error.
I have a spelling error. Where?
21.
Yes, I do. Thank you. It is not lunch settings, it is launch settings. Better? Thank you, that was awesome.
Thank Copilot for giving you the spelling error.
Thank you, Copilot, for giving me that spelling error. I love it. Dockerfile. The next one we want to build is the Dockerfile. Now, it's important that this is Dockerfile and not Dockerfile.txt. So if your editor created it as Dockerfile.txt, easy enough to rename it and just make it Dockerfile. Yeah, file without an extension. Windows loves that part. Now, I do have the Docker extension installed, and so because of that, I get these nice icons, I get some autocomplete help, and that's pretty cool. So there's 4 main verbs here in a Docker file. There's from, copy, run, and cmd. And if you understand these 4 main verbs, you can read and write most Docker files pretty much in their entirety. And that's really cool. We'll see a few more today. But these 4 verbs are the things that do that Docker content. So let's start with from. We want to stand on the shoulders of giants. We want to start with a base image that has the tools that we need, but not too many. So let's head off to Docker Hub, and we'll search for .NET. And we'll land here on this repository that is a meta repository of all the other .NET repositories. Now, .NET samples is great. Lots of different Docker files that we can use for examples to pull from. Monitor is fun, monitoring a .NET app. Runtime deps is everything that we would need to install .NET, but .NET isn't installed yet. Built on top of that is the runtime. It allows us to run console apps, but not web servers. Built on top of that is ASP.NET that allows us to run web servers, but doesn't have the build tools installed. And then SDK is the one with the build tools. Well, we want to build, so let's start there. Let's open up this one and take a look at the base image. Here's that base image. And I'm using .NET 8, so I'll pull that one. Scrolling down, we can see various tags. And there's one, if we just use .NET 8, we're building on top of Debian, but Alpine is significantly smaller. So let's use 8.0-Alpine, and that'll give us a smaller base image. So from this -Alpine, and we now have all of the build tools in our base image so that we can start to compile our ASP.NET application. Excellent. Let's copy everything from the directory where we'll run our Docker build command into the current directory in our image. What is that current directory? Let's set workdir to /src. Now that could be anything. I could say var lib foo bar, and it will recursively create and change into those directories to be able to build there. But in this case, src is completely fine. That's descriptive enough for me. I'm copying everything into place. Now that I've copied everything into the place, now let's run some build commands. If I was in a shell, maybe I'm in bash, or maybe I'm in PowerShell, then what are the commands that I would run? Well, let's do a .NET restore, and I'll do demo.sln. I have the new C# dev kit extension, so it automatically generated for me demo.sln. That's pretty cool. .NET build. I'll build in release mode. Demo.sln. New in .NET 8. It now builds in release mode by default if it notices it's in a container. That's pretty cool. But I'll be explicit here. .NET test. I'm also going to test in release mode just to make sure that I don't end up with one debug build and one release build when I go to try and publish it. And then finally, .NET publish. I'll publish in release mode. I'll go to the app folder, and I'm going to do level up devops.cs proj. That's the project that I want to publish. Cool. So those would be all the commands that I would run from the command line if I was going to do this in shell script. And so maybe I might want to move this to build.sh and just call it, but I kind of like it right here. So now how do we run these as Docker commands? Well, let's do this. Let's run this one. Let's run this one, and this one, and this one, and now they are Docker commands. Cool. So to be able to get this built container, I need to run my tests correctly. I also need to build correctly. So if I have a build error, then my build will stop here and I won't get farther. If my tests fail, I'll stop here and I won't get farther. And that's really cool because now I know if I have a published image, I know that my build succeeded, I know all my tests passed. Next, let's set some environment variables like ASP.NET Core URLs. We'll go to port 8080 in this case. The plus means all IP addresses, so not just the loopback IP address, but I want to grab the public address as well. Let's do ASP.NET Core environment equals production. That looks great. And let's expose port 8080. Now that doesn't actually expose it. It's just metadata on my image that says, if you start, you probably want to forward traffic in on this port. Great. So I've got all of these in place. I probably also want to say env connection string __ my DB, and I'm going to set that to blank because I want the people consuming my app to set this environment variable so that they can then connect to the database successfully. Excellent. Now, CMD is that last thing, and it's the only one that runs at runtime. All the rest of these commands ran at build time, and so by the time I've finished my build, by the time I've pushed my image up to Docker Hub or another registry, then all of that part is done. But as I pull it down and I start it as a container, what do I want to do? I want to start .NET level up devops.dll, and I'm going to set work dir to /app to ensure that I'm now in the correct directory. Excellent. We've got a Dockerfile. Now this Dockerfile would work great in production. We could use this today. But there are some best practices that we can leverage here. So let's add some best practices. Well, one of the things that we want to do is avoid build tools inside of our production image. If, for example, this container got popped and somebody uploaded their own source code, they could compile it, they could add that to my project, and now I'm starting to run their code. Let me see if I can remove the build tools from the production image. Now I could definitely build outside the container and copy into it, but then I lose my neutral environment. We definitely want to keep a neutral environment here. So let's head back over to Docker Hub, and we'll find the ASP.NET runtime. So let's pop up in the ASP.NET runtime, and we will take a look at exactly that. And then we will have, there's that image that we want to grab. Scrolling down a bit, we can see that it definitely has an Alpine variant as well. And so the Alpine variant is the one that we'll use. Oh, welcome to exactly that time. So I want to split my Dockerfile in half now. I want to have one side that is my build server and one side that is my production runtime. So I'm going to say this is from this new base image dash Alpine, and I've now split my build in half. I now have a multi-stage build. Now this stage at the top will be my build server image, and this one will be my production runtime server image. And I put server in air quotes here because it's not a server, it's a Docker container, but we can kind of pretend it's a build server, and so we'll do that. Here's my build server, here's my production runtime server. Cool, we just built two different images at the same time. That's cool. Now here, workdir is app, and we want to copy the files. Let's switch this over to the dist folder. We want to copy from the dist folder into the current folder. And so now we'll get those resources into place. Now the interesting thing here is that right now it's going to go look in this base, host folder for the dist folder. Probably ought to add that to my Docker ignore file. We definitely don't want the dist folder leaking into place. And so really I want to copy it from up here. Let's say copy -- from equals build. Now where is build? Let's call this one as build. Now I could call it as foo or as bar, but I don't know, I think build is much more descriptive. Let's call this as build. Nice. So this is the build stage, and we could also then rename the other stage, the as prod or as runtime or as foo, but we're not going to use that name, so I'll just leave that off. Cool. So now, here in this build stage, we'll have all of our source code. And at the very end of this stage, we will go copy the published assets into place in this new image that does not have the source code. Also does not have the build tools. Excellent. If you upload source code into my image and try to compile it, there is no compiler. There's one more best practice that we can do. Let's imagine that we pop open this CSS file or this JavaScript file and we start making changes. Well, that will invalidate the cache of this copy layer, and then it will run this layer, which will re-download all of the NuGet packages. I just changed a CSS file. Why do I have to re-download all the packages? Really what I want to do is I want to put this first, and then copy all the things, and then do the build, publish, and release. Excellent. Well, I still do need to know what I need to restore, so let's copy in the demo.sln into place and copy level up devops.csproj into place. And now I've got the manifest that I need to be able to enumerate my dependencies and download those dependencies into place. So I'll grab my dependencies, I'll .NET restore, cache that layer, and then copy in everything else, except for what I chose to ignore. And then I'll build, test, and publish. And then finally copy those published results into place in this really thin image that only includes that bundled and published content. It doesn't include my source code. Now, if I didn't do this and I just said, well, let me run rm-rf src, that's deleting the content out of this layer, but it still exists in this base layer, so my image is still going to be very large. So we've now separated this into two pieces to maintain that, that separation and ensure the production image is as small as possible. Excellent. So we now have a Dockerfile. Using our best practices, we don't have source code in our built image. Our built image only has the runtime. We're also leveraging caching to make our builds faster locally. Now let's add a README file. New file, readme.md. Ooh, they really like us. Here's some README content for our repository that'll help our users understand how to use our repository. Okay, now that we've done the Docker bits and the GitHub bits, the Git bits, let's do the Kubernetes bits. I'm going to create a new file, k8s.yaml, and let's build some Kubernetes content. Now, the first thing, I've got this this VS Code extension, the Kubernetes extension right here, and that allows me to use some snippets. It will pull in some interesting things straight away. So I can say, will you create a deployment, please? It knows that it's a YAML file, and so now I can just scaffold out that. Level up DevOps, perfect. I want replicas to be 1, that looks good. I also want to add another label. Let's say image is image name, image label. There we go. And here in the image, I'll also do that. I'll say ACR URL / level up DevOps image label. This will be a replacement expression that will change at build time to match the details associated with our application. What is the port? The port is 8080. That's what we chose to do here in our Dockerfile. 8080 is right there. And we also want to set our environment. And so let's say the name is connection strings _ mydb, and that matches our app settings where it says connection strings. I could do 2 colons, but environment variables don't like 2 colons, and so that'll set that. That nicely matches here in the Dockerfile where I've got that connection strings. Now, I probably want some server equals some server and the user and the password. I definitely don't want those secrets here, so I probably want to either do this, db user and db password, or even better, I want to move that secret into a Kubernetes secret and reference it from here instead. So I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. Let's create a service. Kubernetes service, level up DevOps. I want the selector to be my app. Let's double check that that's the selector here. Yep. And the port is 8080. And the target port is also port 8080. And now I have my service. Let's create an ingress as well. Kubernetes ingress, level up DevOps. I'll set the app to level up DevOps there. My host will be level up DevOps.aks URL. And I'll forward that off to the level up DevOps service on port 8080. Cool. Now, one more thing that I want to do, I want to set my ingress class name to Nginx. Now I know that Nginx is my ingress controller, and it can be able to catch that and put the content into place. Excellent. So now we've got our Kubernetes YAML file. I'm just going to go double check it and make sure I didn't typo things. Let's grab this one, and we'll use Beyond Compare to go look at the one that I built last time and check for typos. Oh, I called it version last time. That's fine. Haha, I had a typo in that part too. That's cool. We'll come back to TLS if we have a moment. Cool. Excellent. So we've got our Kubernetes content. We've built our website. We've built the .gitignore file. We've built the .docker-ignore file and Dockerfile to get it into a Docker container. We've built the Kubernetes content to be able to launch it in Kubernetes. And now let's commit it to our source code repository. Now I'm going to very specifically look at our gitignore file and see how we did. Do we have any downloaded content? Well, actually we do. We have a bunch of this bootstrap content. Let's actually head over to CDN.js and see if we can reference those from the cloud instead. Let's look for bootstrap, and we'll take a look at the bootstrap. Oh, yep, let's use bootstrap.min.css. I'm going to copy that tag, and we'll come here into our view, into our shared layout view, and here in this bootstrap reference, we'll just reference that as a CDN resource. Now I don't need it in my project anymore. Excellent. Let's also come down here at the bottom, and we'll do a similar lookup inside of CDN.js to be able to grab the two scripts. We've got Bootstrap and jQuery for some reason. Let's use those from a CDN. Here in our validate scripts partial, let's replace these with CDN resources as well. And so now I've got that. The other way to go here would be to create a package JSON and npm install them. At that point, then I have two dependencies. I'd need to modify my gitignore to do that. And we'd also need to modify our Dockerfile to be able to do the npm install. But now that we've got these outside of the repository, we can come back here into our www root, and all of these folders we no longer need anymore. We're loading those libraries from somewhere else. Excellent. So now that we've got that solved, let's come back here into our commit window. Do we have downloaded content? Nope. Very nice. Do we have built content? Nope. Excellent. User files? No. Temp files? Any secrets? Let's pop open our not launch settings, our app settings.json and app settings.development.json. Nope. No secrets there. Very nice. Let's stage all these changes. Level up DevOps. Is it okay if I don't call it initial commit? Okay, so we've got our website, and now let's git push origin main and push that up to GitHub. If you now come back to this GitHub repository and refresh it, you should now see the content. Great. Our repository isn't empty anymore. Now let's build up a DevOps pipeline to be able to get this into place. I'm going to come into GitHub Actions and forget to delete the practice runs. And let's take a look at GitHub Actions. Now the cool part here with GitHub Actions is we can pick from lots of different templates. Here's ones that it decided were relevant. Here's deployment things, security things, continuous integration, automation, pages. Or we can even start with a completely empty workflow, and it will get us going there. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to choose a simple workflow. That'll get us started. Here's our simple workflow, and let's start configuring from there. Cool. So I'm going to do this. Docker build Kubernetes run. That's what my build will do. Let's clean up some of this. We want to do it on push to the main branch. That's great. We'll come back to pull requests. Let's remove that. Workflow dispatch is great. Have you ever done a thing where you want to kick off the build so you commit, well, a space in some random file? If you have workflow dispatch, you're able to, that's happy. You're able to kick off the build directly from inside GitHub. We'll see that in a minute. Now, what do I want it to do? Well, I would like it to do these steps. It'll run on Ubuntu. That's excellent. It starts out by checking out my content, And then I can choose to run one-line script or a multi-line script. I like that. Let's start with a multi-line script and build up all the steps that we need to do. Let's say docker build and push Kubernetes kubectl apply. Those will be the steps that we do. Excellent. So docker build, I'll tag this right away, level up DevOps, version, and in the current directory. Well, I want to tag it with my container registry. We did have that secret that we built previously, and so let's go take a look at that secret. Here's my secrets that I created. And so my container registry, I just happen to call this environment variable ACR URL. Well, how did we build those secrets? Let's come into using secrets inside of GitHub Actions. We start off by creating the secrets, go into settings, click on secrets. We will add a secret. We did that. And then when we use it in the code, we can use it like this. $curly secrets dot that secret name, and then that will reference our secret. So let's do that here too. I want to say, I want to reference my ACR URL, and that then will be the tag there. And here I'm going to tag it with github.sha, my Git hash. Now I could use any version, I could use the build number, but what I like about the GitHub SHA is it's going to be unique for this source code, and that will just create a natural mapping of if this is the image running in production, I can get back to the source code that created it. Cool. So we've got that Docker build. Let's say Docker push this image into our container registry of choice. Not there, there. And that will push it. Well, actually what it'll do right now is it will fail authentication. We need to log into Docker Hub, in this case, Azure Container Registry. So let's do a Docker login, and we'll take a look at, oh, here's a cool task. We can go view the marketplace listing, and we can see how this task works. We could take a look at the GitHub repository that builds this task. We can take a look at various use cases. And we can get a really cool setup here of how we might use this. That's great. Or the shortcut here. Here's the content of how we use it right here. I'll just copy that, and I'll set that into place right here. And unfortunately, we need to indent it very carefully because, well, YAML. There we go. Now we've got this Docker login in place, and let's set it in place. Now we've got this registry. We have, nope, not that one. We have this secret ACR URL, and that'll get us straight into that registry. If we were in Docker Hub, we wouldn't need that. What is our username? Well, let's put in the ACR username. And then we'll look at the password. We have a secret for that too, ACR password. Excellent. We'll leave ACR off, and then let's talk about logout. Now, if we're on a shared host, we probably want to remove our secrets after this use. And so let's definitely log out. Part of GitHub Actions, this hosted runner, is it's just going to destroy the whole VM after we're done. And so our secret will definitely be gone, but it's good code hygiene. If we're using a local runner or we have a corporate runner, then maybe this is more important. But let's do good code hygiene. We'll remove our secret. That doesn't remove it after this step runs, but rather after the entire build runs, it will clean out that secret. Excellent. So now that we're logged into Docker, now we can Docker push and get that into our Azure Container Registry. Perfect. The next thing we want to do is kubectl apply-f k8s.yaml, and that will run our Kubernetes YAML file into our Kubernetes cluster. Well, in a similar way, we need to log into Kubernetes. So we do have a secret here that is our kube config. That kube config came from inside of the inside my user profile. Inside the .cube folder, there's a config file, and I'm definitely not going to open that one. It has actual secrets in here. But there's that base 64 encoded cert and the base 64 encoded cert and key. And so I just need to pick out those parts of that kube config that represents my production deployment. So I grab that, I set that in the secret, and so now let's go reference that as we log in. So let's come back to the marketplace and we'll search for Kubernetes set context. That one looks great. Let's grab that YAML right there and indent it a little bit differently. There we go. And so what is our method? Well, kube config, we've got that kube config secret there. And because we have the kube config, we can set the secret here to secrets.kubeconfig. And then we can remove all the rest of these. These are parameters for the other methods of authenticating. And now we are authenticated into our Kubernetes cluster. We're able to now run Kubernetes commands on that cluster as part of our build. Now, one of the things that we had done here inside this Kubernetes YAML file is we have these replacement expressions. DB user, we have image label, ACR URL, AKS URL is down here. And we want to be able to leverage these secrets or these configuration values inside of our build. So we could definitely use Helm, and Helm might be a great solution here, but it might be a little bit overkill for this small project. So instead, I'm going to grab this sed expression that will do some of that work for us. Here's that sed expression, and I'm going to wrap so that we can see it. I'm going to sed, without backup, the text ACR URL with the value of that secret, the text AKS URL with the value of that secret, the text image label with the GitHub SHA, and I will do all that inside the Kubernetes YAML file. Cool. So just a quick sed to be able to replace the find and replace inside that text file to be able to get the actual values into place that we need for this Kubernetes YAML file. So here's our build. We'll run on Ubuntu. We'll check out our latest code. We'll log into Docker using all those secrets. We don't have any secrets embedded in our DevOps pipeline. They're all secrets inside of GitHub's secret manager. We'll log into Kubernetes. We're still not putting secrets in our build file. We'll Docker build. That will run all of the steps here in this Dockerfile. Build, test, and publish. We have those multi-stage builds in place. Then we will push that to our container registry. We will replace those expressions, and we'll finally run that inside of Kubernetes. Now, I chose specifically to put this sed line here, because if I put this sed line here, and if, say, for example, we come back into our Docker ignore, and somebody forgot to put in the k8s.yaml file here in the non-production files, then we might copy those secrets into our container, and now if you were able to pop my production container, you could get my deployment secrets as well. So let's not do that. Let's instead move this sed line down to after we've pushed this to the registry. The secrets don't even exist in that file until after the container is already gone and in our container registry. Perfect. So now let's come here. Let's commit this change. Create DevOps pipeline. And we will commit that change. Now, the cool part is that, oh, I called it blank.yaml. That's entertaining. This is just one of the regular files inside of my repository. So I can do a git pull, and then I will see this file appear inside my repository. There's that file, and I can just interact with it as a regular file along with all the other things that I'm doing. Cool. Now, that means I can continue editing it here, but I can also continue editing it here. I can just pop open this file. I can click Edit. I'm back in that developer experience with the marketplace, and I can start to drag in additional tasks. But because it's in the .github/workflows folder, and because I've enabled it, then we get a build that kicks off, which, by the way, failed. Why did it fail? Because I typoed the csproj file in my Dockerfile. Let's go fix that typo. Yeah, it's not nested in a folder. Fix typo. Let's commit that and push it. Git push. And we'll kick off another build. Cool. So this build is going to then do each of the steps in our DevOps pipeline. So let's take a look at that. It logs into Docker. It logs into Kubernetes. It's going to run each of the steps of our Dockerfile. And once it finishes that task, it's going to push that up to Kubernetes. So right now, kubectl get all. I don't have anything in Kubernetes yet, so it will create new resources. That's perfect. Let's see what the build's going to do. The build's going to wait for a runner. Oh, there we go. So we did all of those steps. We pushed that up to our container registry. We started that in Kubernetes. And so if we come back over here, we can see those resources are now in Kubernetes. Cool. Now, Kubernetes and DNS takes a while to propagate. So instead of waiting for this host to show up, I'm just going to jump straight in place. We can take a look at how we might use Kubernetes port forwarding to dig directly into that. Now, we could definitely port forward into a pod. There we go. Port forward into a pod. Or we could port forward into a deployment. It'll pick a random pod. We can port forward into a service. We can't port forward into an ingress, but skipping the ingress because DNS takes a while, let's port forward straight into this service. kubectl port forward service / level up DevOps. We'll go from port 8080 on our local machine to port 8080 inside that service. Now, this isn't going to return right away because it's got that connection live to it. And let's come over here, and we'll go to localhost 8080. And we see our website running in the cloud right now, the one that didn't exist an hour ago. Woohoo! That was awesome! We did a DevOps pipeline from start to finish and got this deployed into a container running in Kubernetes. Now let's take a look at pull requests because we set that one aside for a bit. I want to come back here into my build. And let's copy this build and create a new build. I'm going to create this new build that is dockerpr.yaml. And I could definitely create conditions here. I could say condition or if the build was on a certain branch, and I could jump around there. But in this case, our build will be substantively different. So we'll do this as a separate build file instead. Build a PR. And so I want to run this on branches that are not main. And I also want to do this on pull request. That I'll do this on any pull request branch. Now, why do we have both? Well, for internal collaborators, people who are part of our project, they're probably going to create a new branch. Maybe it's feature / something, and then they'll want to merge that back in. So this top one will grab that build. For external collaborators, people on the internet who fork the repository and create a pull request back into our repository, they'll come in through this reference. And so they'll create pull requests into our repository, and it'll kick off the build here. So we have one for internal collaborators and one for external collaborators. Excellent. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we probably don't want to run this pull request in Kubernetes because, well, that's our production environment, so let's not do that. Well, if we're not going to run stuff in Kubernetes, we don't need to log into Kubernetes, which probably means we also don't need to set the secrets in our Kubernetes YAML file. Our build is getting simpler. That's cool. Let's also not push this image to our Azure Container Registry. We don't want some random PR image to accidentally get pushed into production someday. We probably want to rebuild it. And so we probably don't even need to log into Docker either. So let's remove that. To that end, I'm not even going to reference this secret right here. I will just say that your container is named levelup DevOps-PR. We're not going to push it anywhere. We don't need that registry name. It just eliminates another secret. Cool. So we've got this new build file. And let's also come back into this README. And let's add a tag. So let's go back into that build. And we'll take a look at this build run. And we'll come here and we'll say, I would like to create a status badge. Copy that status badge. And let's set that right there. Cool. So we've got our status badge. We've got our pull request build. And we're going to commit this then to our main branch. So, we've also got that changes. Good thing that somebody remembered to ignore that Kubernetes YAML file so we don't accidentally deploy that. And so we're going to say add PR build and status badge and commit that. Now, last time we pushed from the command line. This time, let's push from VS Code. And so we'll push that into our GitHub repository. And so now there's that new run there. And it's going to kick off a build. Last time we went in this way. This time, let's come in this way. Here's that new build. And so it's going to do each of those steps. It's going to start off logging into Docker, then it will log into Kubernetes, then it will start doing all of those steps in our Dockerfile, and so it will kick off a Docker build. It's copying the stuff. Is it going to succeed in our build? Yep, our build succeeded. We have no tests, so we have no failing tests, so that succeeded. Let's publish our thing into the other image, and we'll push that image up to our GitHub, our Azure Container Registry. We will now start that image inside of Kubernetes, and now our build succeeded. Great, we've got our new version inside of Kubernetes. Well, how do we know that the new version got deployed? Well, let's take a look at this. kubectl get all. Now, one of the things that we did was we very specifically created this label on our pod that said that image label. And in our DevOps pipeline, we went and found that image label, and we replaced it with the GitHub hash. So let's take a look at that resource. kubectl describe pod / this level up DevOps one, the one that's running. Oh, nope, the one that's pending. Right here. I bet it's running by now, though. And let's take a look at that content. Well, we have a bunch of stuff. It's triggered. It's looking for an available node. It's here's our limits on it. And here's our version, ADEF849BE. If we come back into our source code, we can see ADEF849BE is the Git commit that we just pushed. So now we can really easily get from the running resources to the source code that created it. I would even go a step farther and put it on the web page down in the legal things, that Git hash, so that if somebody sends me a screenshot of the website, I can say, oh, I know exactly what Git commit I need to check out to be able to replicate your issue. Excellent. So we have that running. And we also have that PR build in place. And this code is now up on GitHub, starting with our empty repo. We did it. Thanks for coming.